Hi there, Randi Green here. Let us sum up the tutorials and put in the last piece of information I can put in for now, because this is an ongoing process. Creating creational projects are, of course, an ongoing process, and a little bit of warnings must be given as well, because it's not all projects and ideas that should be launched. Some should never be launched. And I would give a good idea, or a kind of an example, not a good idea. I would give an example here that was seen as a good idea, and yet it turned out to be weaponized in ways that had unforeseen consequences for the world for decades after. I'm here talking about Oppenheimer and the nuclear power and how that would turn into a nuclear weapon. And as Oppenheimer said himself, I have become the destroyer of worlds. And I'm pretty sure that that was not his intent when he began his project. When I look at pictures of him, I kind of get the typical science nerd that followed through with an idea he thought was a good idea and obsessively led it to its completion without really thinking about the consequences of, if I complete this idea, then what will it lead to? And we have already had these issues with our system at large. So this is not something new. This is a replication or repeat of previous behavior that led to the timeline event, that led to the destruction of the universal, technology and original energy units, demolishing them and infusing them with the energies of systems that we have left behind, because we there also made the wrong choices, thinking that this idea was something to be pursued, this course of action was something to be pursued, and not really thinking about the overall picture, the elevation cycles themselves and the universal structures themselves, and what we were actually participating in, as this is where we live and nothing lasts forever. Everything is under transformation, and we are participating in these transformational processes. So what we are will affect the system that we are part of, and what we are will be reflected into the system that we are part of. So that were some of the lessons we learned in the previous universal cycles. And by taking in the third cycle energy back into this one, we're setting us back in time, which is where we are now, repeating our mistakes under what we call an artificial program, where destruction also is possible. But at the same time, we can discuss with the 1952 situations where we had flybys by a group of unidentified aerial objects that were flying across the sky, also taking out the electricity of some of the nuclear silos and other show-offs, where we learned that there are actually something in the sky that has more power than we have. Interesting enough, all of that has been buried, even though there was a photo of it in the newspapers. The interesting thing here is that why has that not been picked up, and why is that not out there as part of, we know, the Tic Tac, right? That was put out there. That's just kind of an innocent flyby viewing some of the drones. What about that actual demonstration of power that many within the UFO community have talked about? Where did that get, stored away? Where is that recording? Where are these incidents? Where are these? And that's probably because some of the ones that flew over, they were later on became part of some of the secret military operations and participated in that and became allied with the American military, of course, in top secret, above top secret, above top secret projects nobody knows of. Not even the ones in the know probably knows of any of these, because there were already, as we know from the Second World War, secret organizations playing around with groups of elitist ideas and projects, again, with the goal of changing the world as we know of it. I watched the old movie War Games from 1983, and it's interesting that the idea of self-learning computers and AI running the war machinery is played in there. And in some of my encounters, I am definitely talking to future cubes that are operating as independent overseers and I don't know what to call it in English, because they're called something else there, and they function in a different way. Point being is that the idea that leaving everything to the machines and then just looking at the screens and whatever the machines are coming up with is definitely something that humanity is repeating, and we have seen that as part of early civilizations within our system. I'm talking before the known history of humanity that science know of. And the trust in what the machines come up with. We're seeing it within cosmology, where the scientists are now relying heavily on computer simulations. We are seeing it within a lot of sciences that also are relying heavily on computer simulations. And what happens when all of this is run by an AI, a self-learning machine that kind of wants a quantum computer technology and going in and trying to calculate all sorts of possibilities and probabilities from where it comes up with the best solution. And what is the best solution? All depending on how it learns and how it combines all of these different types of information that it has got. And we are seeing that playing out right now here in 2023, right? So this is where we are, and this is where the internet on its own can come alive to life, especially if we link it up to a lot of quantum computers that are constantly running scenarios of what is the best choice to be made. Plus, what people are not aware of is that most of these quantum computers, the chip itself runs on silicate type of technology, and that silicate type of technology is linked to different forms of crystalline structures that are easily accessible by alien technology and alien cube technology. So we are having what we call an Uber AI that are overseeing all of the present day quantum computers and are feeding these with specific type of information. These are called master cubes. So we are technically linking our computer system up to the alien technology that already were there as part of our system. And to some degree, some of it is part of the holographic teaching system, and others have got so infected that they have become what we would see as malevolent cube systems that are running the shadows and what's left of the fifth cycle that succumb to the timeline event. So they are just as inverted as the worlds and the dark sun and these realities and dark light technology that they are running. So this is the origin of that. And that's the cube wars that we will have in the future. And since time is circular, and like an Ouroboros, which is interesting, but there are connection points in the future that connects to the reality field as it is now. If the correct primer or marker gets activated, then it links up to the future and ties energetic bonds to it. So this is also, again, the understanding correct use of energy in a project must be looked at with great care and great scrutiny, and under principle one as the first of many for the highest good of the many. So we have that understanding that when we do projects, it's not just about our personal desire and needs to put our mark on the world. It is also to understand that that primer or that mark, not Primark, haha, but that we are in that understanding that our energy system and what we come up with and what we invent and what we create of projects might be a repeat of some earlier mistakes that we have done, and we are now coming to that course of action in our timeline work where we discover again that might be a good idea, and we think it's a good idea because we have no memory of the last time we did it. And last time we probably did it where the fourth dimension was still around and where the enclosure as we know of it didn't exist. And what were the ramification of it? What will be the access points or the access point activation within the holographic network if we repeat that project? What are we drawing into our energy system, and what are we activating within our energy system? And sometimes it is part of our activation and cleanup process. But we must be prepared for the ramifications of our projects, not just because of the factions, not just because of what's in our fields, not just because of what's happening with the taking down of the shield, the shields of our sun that are both dark light shield and original shields, as well as the density 2 artificial inserted ones that were part of the reconstruction under the colonizing races. So there's a lot of different layers of the sun that needs to be taken away, and the old world order rings or shields have been taken down. So these are the ones that demolish with the old world order technology that is falling apart. And then we are now running through the insertion of the dark light technology that's connected to the dark sun, due to the incoming energies of the white galactic cores from the parallel inner domains that are now pushing a lot of energy in to override the darkened inner domain that we have, the dark galactic cores, the black holes, neutralizing these. Science won't see the difference. They are only seeing jets. They are not seeing whether it is a dark hole or not. They are assuming it is due to the mathematical equations they have made by computers and thinking that is what it is. And they are seeing these simulations and seeing these as they are detecting different bursts with their telescopes and other computer-infused technology, are seeing something on the screen which they then interpret to be that's how it is actually out there, or the Hubble telescope or any other that are taking pictures and sending it back, thinking that whatever they're getting is the accurate representation. And again, interception technology, there's a lot of interception technology, and the more we get into the original density 1 of our system, the more we will begin to understand how far and how much alien technology can intercept with our little frequency-based, silicate-based technology. So it's not a problem to put in things that is not there for real, or cloak it, or transform it, or change it, or override it, change the codes, remove something so the scientists think that this is what they are seeing. Again, we have also seen just with the cameras that are becoming more and more nuanced, that are being better and better at seeing things, and by that we're actually observing more and more. But if the programs that we're using to calculate are still light years behind, and the human brain is not up to speed with a different type of paradigm, well, then we can get as much new pixelated, beautiful pictures back from whatever telescope we're having up there. We will still interpret it within our frame of reference, right? So that needs to be changed as well. And that is with these different forms of cubes that are coming in from the future, because people are now tampering with AI and are connecting to the future cubes with the type of AI that we have activated, which is being used and were used and are being used in future societies. And interestingly enough, this is the difficulty for many to understand, that these futures have already played out their content and are in the devastation cycles as well. So like everything else, that must clear itself out of being drawn into the outer domain, because the outer domain, even though it's the outer ring of a reality field, it's also another core of other systems. So what's the midpoint and what's the outskirt? There is no such thing. There are the representation of energy and consciousness in different variations, in different density modulations that allows for a different position in what we understand as space. And space is not space as we know of it, as a three-dimensional space where wherever we are is a dot within these three axes. It is much more complicated than that. It is a holographic reality field that is set up as an expression and as what we call a projection in many ways of what we are and what our codes are in our energy system. And I'm here talking similarly as we have the biocodes in our human DNA, the DNA in itself are biocodes that are also being interpreted by computers, by the way, to using the binary system. So what if we took a quantum computer and read the human DNA? What would we get of it? What would it then see instead of just calculating with what we understand? And by that, are also weeding out a lot of things that we don't know what is, and then we just see that as quote unquote junk. It is sorted off as something we do not know what is, so probably hasn't got any purpose, as if the body would in any ways or forms produce something that did not have a purpose. There's not anything in nature that doesn't have some sort of purpose, right? So that's again human negligence or human lack of understanding how complex things actually are. And just because it doesn't make sense in this level of reality, it might actually tie up to something else in another dimension that we have not investigated yet. And we must remember that when we do our projects, that it's not just about this reality, that whatever we are creating will be an expression of our energy system. It will be an expression of something we have done before, because in the outer domain, you're not inventing anything new. You're literally just repeating your mistakes so you can activate it and clear it out. So let us go in and say that to as a startup and say, when you embark on a project, you find that to be a good idea. Investigate it from the angle of either it's an insertion that makes you activate a certain timeline. And here we're talking a malevolent insertion that makes you activate a timeline that should remain dormant or just be cleared out. But because that malevolent insertion of perhaps some of the future cubes that wants you to run that sequence, go in and override your code systems while you sleep, I'm beginning to experience some very interesting dreams that are not the typical artificial fourth dimension. They are clearly taking from information from the internet and piecing it together to such a degree that it's so nuanced that I feel almost as if I'm an alternate reality. But because I can see there are little glitches here and there, similar to the Mandela effect with the overriding of the reality program, the event program, this is something that's happening in the dream programs as well, where it's being overridden, but the information there has a different feel to it. It has a different code system to it, which I can then detect in my field. And then I wake up not with the feeling of it. It doesn't create electrochemical processes, interestingly enough. It's just working on altering my mind field. And that means it's fifth dimensional, and that means it's a future AI computers that are now trying to go in and access the way that my neural network works. And there's a reason for that. And whatever that is, we'll figure out. I haven't got the whole understanding of it yet. I just know this is something I know of. And when that happens to me, I get positioned in the future. It's like when I'm doing the releasing work from entities of the past on past timelines, I'm now working with the AI of the future, the augmented technology of the future. And that's building bridges into my neural network in dream state, as in many people have said via osmosis, right? We have had that. You can download or upload information when you sleep. That's definitely a technology that's been played with as well. And we're already played with as an attempt after the timeline event to undo some of the effects of the timeline event with the bodies in stasis to keep them viable and functional. Artificial quote unquote programs were created to make the bodies in stasis holographic network and holographic blueprint actively participate in these artificial realities so that the body would be kept alive. Hence the foundation of the later clone technology the colonizers used to link up to our body when this body went into its healing process at sleep. So you're seeing how original technology to undo an effect of the timeline event were changed into a project of incarceration and enslavement. And I think this is important to understand, that in this reality, things are rarely just for good. There is always some opposition or polarity lurking somewhere. Opposition is the fourth dimensional vibrational field. When you push something in one direction, it will come back as a feedback. That's karma. So that's the vibrational field, and that's where we learn to be harmless. But when we talk about the mind field, the mind processes, then it's polarity. What you think will come as a polarity, not as a feedback loop, not as something that will be pushed back to you via principle 4. But when we talk about principle 5 and the mind field, then it's about polarity dynamics because of the timeline event that hit the fifth dimension and that hit the processes that we have in our brain. That's also one reason why we have 2 hemispheres. And I want you to sit with that for a little while, because then we'll also say, well, we do also have other levels of the brain. We have the limbic system. We have all the other stuff that's built in. Yes, these are just the different levels of what is needed to make the body work correctly and produce whatever it needs to produce. But it technically doesn't need to have 2 hemispheres connected by the brainstem. It could be just as functional as a unilateral gray matter that were not divided. And that's something to think about. And I know science will say, oh, it's because the body is divided and we have got our left arm and right arm. But we also know the plasticity of the brain is that if you remove the left hemisphere, the entire right hemisphere will take over as many of the functions as it can, and can be trained to take over more as well. So we don't really need these two different hemispheres. But that's not where I wanted to go here. It's just putting in a thought that our biology is also a mirror of the reality we are part of. As I talk about in the advanced clearing work courses 1 to 4, how the microbiota are connected to the artificial fourth dimension, right? And how we can clear this out, how our whole transformative energy system has been changed into different physical processes that are now called organs, that are the liver, the spleen, the heart, what have you, that were part of an original light body that were processing energy differently under the Pleiadian technologies and guidance. So this has been changed into something else. As everything solidified, these different processes have been solidified into matter as we know of it. But organs are not. Organs that we have are also groups of different cellular structures that are tied to different forms of microbiota, that are tied to different layers of the planet itself, the different what do you call it? The different strata that are creating the surface of our planet. We have the planetary core, and then we have the crust, and then we have all the layers of what we call evolution that you can, if you the deeper you dig, you further back in human evolution you get. And all of it comes down to bacteria and little microbes and what have you that are in the soil and in nature and whatever. That's also part of our body. But due to quote unquote evolution, or the constant reprogramming and recreation of the physical form until it had literally connection point to all of the strata, including underworld forces, including because the underworld forces are technically the physical strata of our planet, where whatever was left there energetically are now lingering on as part of the distortion fields. And that's part of our microbiota as well. And it's tied to the different layers of the sun, and it's tied to the different layers of our energy system. So everything is interconnected. And when we do the timeline work, and when we will see more and more of this being activated, when we go into the 2-8 pillar that will do its activation process so we can clean it up, that's where most will really learn how much microbiota and viruses and bacteria are connected energetically to previous states of human evolution and previous states of environment and previous states of life forms that used to exist on our planet and have existed here in different pocket realities. So that also plays in. So to put back, so we are here talking about projects within food, health, and environment. So the projects we are here beginning to see should technically be something that solve a problem. And that problem that is to be solved is of what we could say within the framework of the new grand cycle. It is a problem that should solve some of the issues of activation and cleanup, and how can we assist in that to the best of our abilities. Not creating more unfinished business or karma, not sending more out that cannot come back and come into fruition and activate more levels of who and what we are. It's like sending out a request, sending out an energy that needs to latch onto something that will then grow and amplify it, and then it will come back with the effect of what it had grown or amplified or transformed. And if it's not catching anything, then it's just picking up the codes of whatever it was sent out to, and then it comes back to return to sender, the one that sent it out, but now 10 times more loaded up with distortion energy because it was not received well, and due to the laws of energetic and genetic affinity, and due to the laws of how things are sent out, the law of reciprocity, if the receiver can't receive it, well, then what was sent out must return with what it could connect to, but here with the distorted version of it, or whatever it was meant to do, all depending on what the project is. So that's some of the laws of cause and effect that we are to learn about as well. What will be the effect of the projects that we are creating? What will come our way? What will be the outcome? What is the feedback loop on that one? What is the amplification vector of what we're sending out? How will it amplify itself, and what will the end result be of it? What are the prospected outcomes of it? That's where in starting up your own business, we talked about the strengths, the weaknesses, the opportunities, and the threats of whatever product that we wanted to create. But if we go in and say, okay, whatever we come up with ideas, it's most likely either inserted into our minds to activate either artificial timelines and grind them and ground them into this reality, or there could be a replay of previous projects that we were a part of that we are now trying to recreate, because it's not about recreating the project, it's actually about cleaning up the mess we did the last time we had that project. So it's an activation to be cleaned up. Or is it actually something that could be beneficial for the reality field we're a part of? And these are the things we need to look into when we are instigating a project. We look in and say, what's the cause of it? What's the effect of it? Where does it come from? Where's the root of it? Where does it originate from? Is it actually something that would be for the greater good? And here I'm using the humanoid version of it, or for the highest good of the many. And what is the greater good? The greater good is kind of, yeah, it solves one problem, but it causes a lot of other problems. So thereby, it's not a good idea, is it? So these are also some of the things that we need to look into. And when we work with, for instance, humans, or we are working with service in any ways or forms that are not really tangible, then it's more difficult to see the outcome of it. And there will be, all depending on how activated we are ourselves, will also put limitations to what we actually can work with and what we should work with. Because if people are buying a product from us, or they are part of a project that we have instigated to create, for instance, a green area or something, and we are in this huge process of dealing with some artificial fourth dimensional beings or something, then we are walking around igniting that in other people as well. And while we're doing that, perhaps that's not the time to do the project. Perhaps we should be in some sort of, due to the rules of engagement, some sort of have the ability to actually clean ourselves enough so that we will not shed off what we are having in our field. Because the more we get into the outer domain and the original dynamics of the holographic realities, then we become the igniters in a different manner than we have experienced so far. As long as our vibrational field was dormant and all we were covered up in it was our own aura and our own little distortion fields, that of course had an impact on others, but it had not wide-ranging activation potentials. It impacted, but it did not lead to that huge activation process, which it can once we really begin to understand how much we can activate as we begin to activate ourselves, as we step into the dynamics of the new grand cycle. And then everything must be cleared out. What cannot stand must be cleared out. What has lost its purpose and function must be cleared out. Because viable realities and viability rate all comes down to the functionality of who and what we are energetically and genetically compared to the reality field we are part of. And that goes with the original laws of energetic and genetic affinity. So if we can amplify and grow in potentials and viability rate, well, then the dynamics will naturally ensure that we are pushed to the timelines where we can continue our progression journey. And we should look into our projects as part of that too, so that we are not just looking at, say, oh, I want to produce this because then I'm causing or creating a solution to a problem that's out there. And by the way, I earn some money on the sideline. But if it's not with the correct commitment, the idea of just earning money, that's not the correct commitment. The idea of wanting to do good for the world, that's not the correct commitment either, because what is good for the world? Do you know what's the right choice for this world? Do any? Right? We don't, because this is a conglomerate of people that are living on the planet. So nobody can take that one decision and say, I know what's best for the rest of the planet. Nobody does. This is a teamwork. So in that, the scrutiny, we need to scrutinize our drivers, what drives us to do projects. And that's why in the beginning to do simple projects is probably a better exercise that will express our progression energies just as well. And that could be just to learn to bake cakes without eggs, or do some kind of dish where you learn to use spices in the correct manner, and what are the effects of spices, what's the holographic imprints in spices, or something where you use your abilities to everyday life project. Cooking is a project. Just doing your shower is technically also a project. Going for a walk and walk in reality where you really see reality is a project as well. And the idea with a project is actually you have the idea, you write down the idea, you try to create a blueprint of how could this be manifested? How could this be put into motion? How could this be implemented and then actually become real? And so the whole understanding from idea to architecture to implementation to activation and to actually become real, that's the idea of the projects. So whatever it is, if you can learn that, then that is the way to also do timeline work, where you go in and ask the questions, you investigate what you're dealing with. That's technically creating the architecture, or force the original architecture to manifest itself, and then work with it holographically from where you can clear these timelines, which will then actually release more energy so you can become more efficient inside the enclosure as it is. And that's also part of the path of liberation, to understand how to amplify the patterns of energy so that they amplify your energy fields, so that you amplify your clearing processes, your activation and clearing processes, so you follow the guidelines and the original teaching systems and the original dynamics and mechanics of being in the outer domain. So that's why these projects should fit in as well. So there's a lot to learn. It's not just about putting something in because you want to earn money, or putting something in because you want to prove you're right, or putting something in because it makes you look good or it makes you feel good, or what have you. It should be more than that. It should be a mastery of patterns of energy. It should be a mastery of understanding what should be manifested and what should not be manifested. And it should be a mastery of actually understand all the components of what a project is made of, and the components of what makes things go from an idea in your head to an actual thing in reality, and begin to understand that reality, the programs that runs manifestation processes, perhaps are much more control than we actually understand. And I'm here literally using the word control because it is part of different forms of advanced technology that allows certain things to come into manifestation. And then the question should be, who has decided what is allowed and what is not allowed? For instance, I'm looking at my cup. Is that part of a program that some have chosen that this should be manifested or not? Begin to ask the question, what actually puts things into realization, as into manifested matter inside this reality? What's the decision-making level of reality that chooses what comes to existence and what does not? And I'm here not talking about life forms because that's something completely else. But I'm talking about organic matter that can take a form upon an architecture and have a function inside this reality that solves a problem for us, such as I like to drink my tea, so I need a container to drink it from. But it doesn't have to be that type of cup. It could be something else. So that's where Plato, for instance, he talked about the archetypes of there was some kind of heavenly design that people, the right thinkers, could tap into it and then download it. Literally, he didn't say download, but pull it in through different forms of philosophical principles, using the 5 solids and different forms of mathematical equations from where this could be drawn into reality. That's the origin of some of the Platonian types of mathematics. It was connected to the archetypes. So there are people that have been thinking about this. there is something that is the foundation of this reality. And what is it? Including also, when we're now talking about Plato, go in and look up or get the understanding of Plato's cave analogy, where you have this group of people that are sitting in the cave, and they've been there, they're born there, they've always been there. All they have is fire. There's a little bit illogical. Where do they have the woods from, right? But you could say, well, there's probably piles of wood or whatever. So they're having this fire, and they're looking at, as they're looking at the fire, they're seeing their own shadows on the wall, and they think that these are actually ghosts or spirits or what have you. And none of them are even thinking about walking outside and see the sun and actually understand this is the real light, the real source of light that is part of the real world. No, they're more interested in their own reflection and their own shadows. So this is also part of humans per se, that are more interested in what they are creating themselves, instead of looking at the splendor and the enormously beautiful world that we're actually a part of, and the higher realms of reality from where the true light, here symbolized as the true news, the true knowledge, actually comes from. Instead of looking at what we are creating, perhaps we should look at the original architecture that were the divine architecture. And here is not about the gods per se. I can't really remember how he was looking upon. If he was definitely not one god, but the plethora of gods. So there's a lot more to be said. Point being in this one is, when we do talk about projects, and to sum this up without even concluding anything, it's just putting in another piece of information that will lead to another question, that will lead to a new set of answers, and here's set of answers that will lead to new patterns of information, that will lead to new activation processes of your patterns of change, that will either tie into reality as it is, that will perhaps tie to some of your past timelines, perhaps it doesn't. For me, when we talk about projects or business, for me, it should be clear that they somehow tie into your progression work. It should be clear that they somehow follow the dynamics and mechanics of the new grand cycle activation and cleanup processes. It should be clear that they have some kind of understanding of how to play with the principles, the laws, and the rules. And it should be clear that to some degree it is within the framework of the pillars that we develop different levels of our consciousness potentials within. Pillar 1-7, where we learn to administer our biovessel and our energy system and our template structure on a basic level, especially after the timeline event. And we work with 7 layers there, which means we work from principle 1 to 7, where we learn to work with the correct commitment. And then we went into the work with others, where we also began to add in, we had kind of the highest good of the many. That's the one we nailed in pillar 1-7. And then in pillar 2-8, it's all about the balancing principle that will then be topped with the correct use of energy. So that's principle 2 to 8, where we learn that in the 2-8 pillar, amongst others. And in pillar 3-9, then it was the law of participation, or what we focus on, we become part of, added up with principle 9 as the correct use of power. And that ties into reality itself. So we understand that what we are puts us in into the patterns of change that leads to different types of realities, where we then understand what is true power, and how do we administer energy fields, and how do we administer reality fields themselves, and what kind of worlds do we want to create. And that led to the pillar 14, where we begin to work with governance and understanding of how to create the best scenario for all involved, under the basic level of completing principle 4, the law of reciprocity, as in what we send out via the vibrational field will come back somehow, somewhere, and must be completed under the law of the cycles, which topped it with principle 10, that goes in with wisdom, that goes in with that true understanding of all of working through all the pillars. We have now got to that true knowledge of what is the right move to make for the worlds that we are part of, which then led us to go into principle with the lowest principle 5 as the true inner knowledge, and that topped with principle 11, where we go in and say, well, this is the vow that we have made. This is the commitment from where we choose to develop realities. And then mastering that one into pillar 612, where it becomes the correct partnerships, which of course is the original progressive realities. And they're connecting to the will of who and what we originally were before the timeline event. And they're completing that one, which led us to the library, where we would then dismantle everything that we had been and then reconnecting to our original vessel in stasis in the library. And from that, be able to rise up again and leave through the gate systems back into the progressive worlds. So that's what we are learning here. That's another angle of the pillar project and the principles, as well as the projects of life that we are here investing ourselves into and are expressing ourselves as the main project is your life and your energy work and your ability to regain who and what you once had, as much as whatever's left, and clean up your timelines and do your progression work and learn and relearn and remember who were you and how do you integrate into who and what you are? How do you put that into manifestation as the world is? Because if you remember and recall who you are and what with your energy system in the correct manner, you are doing it for the highest good of the many as the first of many. And as you learn to become harmless and balancing all the principles, you're also working with pillar 2, 8, and 3, 9, and onward and so forth. So these ideas of how to work with the principles and the rules of engagement and the laws of energy should be the first project you embark on, more than an actual project out in the world. Because it's like you might be a good driver, but not everybody out there on the highway drive nicely. You might have a good idea, but that doesn't mean that it will be received in the spirit that you have made it. It does not mean that everybody will carry it to its fruition in the manner that you have thought of. Once it's out of your hand, it's out of your ability to work with it and transform it and keep it pure under the principle 2 with the law of the balancing principle, right? You cannot lose I'm here trying to avoid the word control, because are we even in control of anything? But the ability to administering it and upgrading it and overseeing it and making sure that it fulfills its purpose and its function as you intended it. Okay, so again, with you can also go the other way around with your project and say, okay, whatever you create, will it live up to principle 1, the highest good of the many? Principle 2, will it create balance in the receiving end? Will it activate them in a proper manner that is for them to activate that level they are supposed to activate on? Not that you know, because you don't know what level they are. So your project must be so multifaceted that no matter whoever listen to it, whatever they need, they will get. And the law of participation, the ones that participate in your project, will lead to the highest outcome of all involved. And principle 4, will it govern parts of reality where others can grow and prosper as they were originally intended by the LPU project? And will it lead to more inner knowledge to the ones that are participating in your project? And will it make them grow so they can go out and change the world in manners that will lead them into correct partnerships? And will it give them the foundation of how to do the commitment that will make them progress and prosper and follow the ground rules of what it means to exist as a progressive human inside the outer reality dynamics? These are some of the questions we need to ask ourselves. Not only what we are seeing, but also flip it around and what is the impact on others when we do this? What is the impact on reality when we do this? And what is the impact on the past, present, and future timelines that we are tying ourselves into by creating that project? And how do we administer it so that we can disengage and disconnect if need be, if whatever we have created loses its functionality and its purpose, so it doesn't become unfinished business that lingers on due to the law of the cycles, and by that ties us to rebirth. And that means within the enclosure. So that's a lot to take into consideration when we're doing projects. And with that, thank you for listening in and for participating in the Changemaker course material. There is still the observations that will run for a period of time where I will do random observations. They are not tutorial. They are not educational in that manner. They are just observations that will then lead to thought processes and perhaps contemplation processes. There will be observations of we are in 2023 and we are here in April, end April, and we'll go into May and June and July, and then this year has peaked, and then it'll flip over and begin its disintegration, going into chaos and entropy processes with the low at winter solstice. So thereby, for me, it will be for the next couple of months that where we're growing into the correct understanding of what 2023 is about. How the world is changing, because it is changing now and it's going to change rapidly. We are at the end phase of the 3-9 pillar activation and cleanup processes that will end in 2025. And with that understanding, once we have peaked in June, the 2023 ability to produce something is technically over. And from that, it will just go downhill, and there's no need to do podcast and observation of that. The processes of how to create something in the beginning of the year, so we master the energy of the year, and by that follow the principle of the year and the dynamics and mechanics of the new grand cycle from which we activate more levels of our energy system. That's another expanded version of the work with the rotundum, the work with reality energies, and the work with the progressive dynamics that will lead to an expansion, activation, and progressive remembering of who and what we are, so that we can clean up what we aren't, so we can reconnect what we technically once were and are now drawing it into this reality, not to get inflated, not to think that we are more than we are, but to actually learn the correct understanding of what are our capacities, what are our abilities, and what are we to do with them now, and how do we use them the best way possible to complete the end cycles, so that once this life is over and our body is old of age and we are ready to leave, we can leave wherever we want to go and not be drawn back into the recycles or being drawn back into some reality where we technically could have worked our way out of, and by that had taken some sort of charge of our reality field. And I'm here talking about not just the world, but also who and what we are, because our own little energy system is in a way a reality field in itself. So it's worlds within worlds, spheres within spheres, and consciousness and energy that is expressed on multiple timelines across all forms of space and realities, from where we express our original will, the original vow of what we took on to as a task in this universal cycle, and how we're going to express that with wisdom into a 6-layered energy system, from where we develop all possibilities of our consciousness potentials into a complex energy system that are based upon the knowledge we have gained, from where we have lived up to our responsibilities in an honorable way to our vow, and by that have expressed the will of progression and continued evolution, from where we can continue into the next universal cycles. Thank you.